What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Look what's in the garage. We've got Dustin's Gladiator here, finally getting to do some work on it. Today we're going to be popping on a Warn Xeon 12S winch, and we're going to be using their cradle. We've got the factory steel bumper on the Jeep, so I think the installation is going to be a lot similar to my JL, but let's get it installed and see if there's any differences. It wasn't too hard of an installation on my JL. It probably took me 4 or 5 hours because I was videoing. I think we can probably do it a lot quicker on the Gladiator because I already know what I'm doing. It's pretty straightforward. We've got to undo 8 bolts on the bumper to remove it from the frame, and then we can install the cradle from Warn. And while we're installing the cradle, we're gonna install the winch onto it, and then we're gonna button up that bumper again. I really like that the JLs and the JTs, you can order these steel bumpers and you can add a winch to them with a small modification. You can kind of retain a lot of that factory look, which I think is really cool. And you don't have to get into some really different looking aftermarket bumper just to add a winch. Probably the #1 mod that you need to add to your Jeep is gonna be a winch if you're gonna do any sort of serious off-roading, especially the Rubicons. The Rubicons can get you a lot of places and can get you in a little bit of trouble, and a winch will go a long way for helping recover your vehicle if you do end up in maybe some deep mud, high centered on something, or going through an obstacle that you just couldn't quite make it through. So I do recommend adding a winch to your vehicle, probably as one of the first modifications that you should be doing. If you added the steel bumper to your new JL or JT, it's gonna make it a pretty easy upgrade, and you won't need to go buy an aftermarket bumper to do so. Now, you will need to buy a winch cradle. There are several companies out there. We're using the Warn one that we're gonna be using with our Warn Winch as well. So that's just a nice, easy solution to go with, but there are a few other ones out there if you wanna do some homework. So first things first, we need to unbox all of this stuff, make sure we've got all the right parts, and then we're gonna pull this bumper off and get this installation going. All right, so this is Warn's winch cradle. It is beefy. It has a nice location for mounting your fairlead to, and we've got the winch mounting points on the bottom. Essentially, once we have the bumper off, we're gonna we're gonna mount this up to the frame rails, which is gonna give it a really nice strong mounting point, which is what you need for your winch because, well, these things are capable of towing or pulling 12,000 pounds, and you don't want it coming off of your Jeep when you're doing something like that. So this is gonna be mounted up to the frame rails. We've got the front plate on here that we can use to mount a license plate, which is kind of handy if you're looking for a good spot and you need to run a front license plate in your province or state. And then we've got a couple of the brackets here which are going to support the cradle. And of course, we've got all the appropriate mounting hardware. Over here, we are just unboxing this beautiful Xeon 12S winch. And we've got one of their new Epic Haas fairleads going on the front with a 1.5-inch opening. And we've got a Factor 55 Ultra hook. These winch hooks are super versatile, and actually Warn is coming together, or just came together with Factory 55. So they are one in the same company essentially, but we've got this one in gray. I went with a yellow one on my JL just to, yeah, make it a little more fancy. So these are all aluminum. This is actually a lot lighter than it looks. You can order these with a rope guard or without a rope guard. The rope guard essentially rivets onto the front and protects your winch line from any damage from brush or rocks or anything you may bump into. We've got our closed system shackle mount point here on the front. And then we've got the clasp here that opens and closes and allows you to hook onto various things. And if you want to prevent this clasp from opening while you're using it, you can pull the pin out of right here, pop it in there. Do as I say, not as I do. But pop it in there like that, and now this clasp won't open, so that's pretty handy. And to attach this to your winch line, you just take a pair of snap ring pliers and you pull the snap ring out, and there's a titanium slug in here that will fall out, and that is going to secure your winch line. But anyways, enough about this. We could probably do a whole video on these guys. Okay, so we just pulled the trim panel off, which we're not going to need that here, and then we've got to pull the I don't know what we call this, skid plate off the bottom. It's pretty sad attempt at a skid plate, but just a few bolts, and then that's going to allow us access to the frame bolts, which are the most important ones, getting the bumper off. Don't forget to disconnect your fog lights here. There's a little plug that you're gonna wanna disconnect because we're gonna need that to when we remove the bumper, obviously. But it is nice that there's only one connector on here for the entire, or both fog lights. You only have to undo one connector. Garage flip-flops. Definitely meets safety standards. All right, so that was pretty straightforward, guys. Just had to undo all of these nuts. Basically, you've got your 4 bolts, your 4 studs on the back of the bumper, right there, and 4 studs per frame rail. So now we can start mounting up that Warn Winch Cradle. To make room for the winch, we've got to remove this plate here, which is, you know, a nice thinking ahead by Jeep. They have a plate that covers up if you don't have a winch, but allows you room for your winch to stick out of the top of your bumper. We've just got to loosen off these 5 bolts. And yeah, I can't count. So we're just gonna put the factory skid plate brackets back on, but we have these new brackets. These new brackets are gonna go in place like so. Like that. So now we've got the carrier, and we're going to put these nuts on the bottom. All right, so we just added a couple spacers to the outside studs. With the new cradle, we've got extra material here now in front of the frame rail. So Warn includes spacers for the studs that are gonna bolt to the outside of the frame rail to make that flush and even. So we just put those in place on the studs here as we're getting ready to get the bumper ready to go on. We've got the winch line threaded through the barrel. We've got to give it a little bit more of a tug to get that key seated, but we're going to wait till this is on to do that, because that'll give us, you know, a stronger mounting point to pull from. If you are going to use your rope guard on your winch line, make sure you put it on before you thread your Warn synthetic line and anchor it on your winch, because you won't be able to get it on afterwards over this hoop. And now we're just going to drop the winch onto the winch plate. We've got these zap straps, these giant zip ties, holding this in place so that we can get the winch on, because we have to have the winch in place before we put the bumper on, and then we need to put the bumper studs through these holes. So until this is bolted on with those studs, we have this industrial strength zip tie here holding this cradle in place. Once we get these studs through, they'll hold the weight of the cradle, and then obviously secure the cradle to the frame, and we'll cut these zip ties and move them out of the way. So we just added the nuts to the bottom of the winch. You want to make sure these are in place before you drop your winch on and have your winch bolts ready to go. And we're gonna drop the winch onto the cradle, and the cradle it just has bolt holes. There's no slots, so there's no movement for this. We're gonna tighten the winch down before we put the bumper back on, because once you put the bumper on, it starts to cover these front bolts, and it just makes it a whole lot harder to tighten it down. And remember, guys, spool your winch line under the barrel, not over the barrel. Just got our winch line here through the front of the cradle to get it out of the way. We've got our positive and negative cables out of the way over on the side here, but we're gonna route those up through here in a few minutes. We don't need to take the grill off, but you can see it's super tight. On my JL, I actually can't even get the grill off with the winch in place. You can kind of pull it forward, but it's so tight between the top of the winch and the actual grill that you can't get the grill out. So if you do need to take your grill off for something, make sure you do that before you do this installation. Otherwise, you're gonna be taking this whole thing apart to get it out, or maybe cutting something. So once the winch is bolted down, we're gonna use our big zip ties to align these frame bolt holes, which this one is pretty good. The other one is a bit loose, so we'll adjust that accordingly. and then we'll start tightening things up. We just removed the airbox, this being a gas model, unlike my diesel, has the airbox on the passenger side, and we're going to fish the positive and negative cables up from the winch before we do up all the bumper. Just gives us a bit more room to work with, and we don't have cables all over the place. So we're just going under the grill, right at the edge here of the frame, and we're coming up right in front of the power steering pump. There's a little hole, which is gonna be good for routing this. You can almost see, if it wasn't for the shadows, you can almost see the ground through there. There it is. And on the gas models, the battery is a little closer. On my diesel, it's way back here, and the positive just barely made it to the positive terminal, but we have lots of extra room here because the battery is sort of in the middle of the engine compartment on the gas engine. So there is the winch cable, or the winch power cable, just run up through that hole that we just showed you, over top of the power steering line, and through this hole in the bracket that holds the battery in place, and then just bolted down or connected to the battery. Now the winch is all on, we're just gonna load the bumper on, lining up these 4 bolts or 4 studs for each frame rail. And don't forget, we do have these plates here because we have to space it out because we have the cradle on there now. And we've got our giant industrial strength zip ties holding it in place. So let's fire it on. After a little bit of finger gymnastics, we were able to get the fair lead bolts routed through. We've got all of the nuts on the studs on the back of the bumper bolted onto the frame. Definitely having some, well, what do you want to call these? CVs or wobblers or whatever you call these is very, very handy. I'm not even sure you could do up these inside bolts. Not sure if you guys can see in there, but I'm not sure you could do these 2 nuts right there without, and definitely the bottom one, without one of these wobbler CV joints for your ratchet. So definitely check those out. We'll turn this light off. Grab some of those beforehand. That'll save you a lot of stress and anxiety trying to get those on. But with the wobbler, no problem. So now the last step with everything buttoned up is we just need to tighten up those lower skid plate brackets that we pulled off to mount the 2 side brackets for the cradle. We're just gonna tighten that up, and that's pretty much the last step. We still have to put the ultra hook on, and we have to re-spool the winch. We just temporarily spooled it in to get all the line out of the way. Lots of guides on YouTube for spooling your winch, but you definitely want to spool it under tension. So if you have somewhere that you can connect your winch line to and apply a little brake pressure, and if you have somebody to help you get that first wrap on your spool, you want to make sure that first wrap is nice and tight. That's basically your anchor for your winch line. All we have to do pretty much after this is we've still got our fog light harness here. We just need to, we're going to reconnect our fog light harness. Dustin's going to keep these end caps on, and we did bolt on this small bull bar. This is the Mopar Bull Bar. On mine, I have the Warn Bull Bar, which is a little higher. The nice thing about this bull bar is if you have the front mounted grill camera on your Gladiator or your 2021 Wrangler, it doesn't get in its line of vision, where if you have the higher one, it's going to actually, you're actually going to see it on this camera. So they made it low. Not a lot of tolerance for the top of the winch here, but it does fit. And yeah, I think it looks pretty cool. But there we go, guys. We've got the winch installed on the factory steel bumper. I think this is just a great way to go, and it's really nice that Jeep allows for a winch cradle to be installed and you don't have to get a new bumper. So let me know what you guys think. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like as always, and don't forget, new videos every week, so smash that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in the next upload.